So you have to excuse the noise, we're in the garage and I've got quite a lot going on. So we have, these have arrived, so I've got 5 of these, and these are to replace the broken ones. So what I've got, this one here, this is the first one I'll do, which will go in that spot there. Now as you can probably see, the board has actually got some kind of lacquer or some kind of a clear coating all over it, which makes it extremely annoying to try and test things, because you can't just put a multimeter on it, you have to kind of scrape it off. So this one here I'll do first, and then this one over here, which is where the other one is. The problem with this is that obviously the solder is still there, so I'll have to heat the solder up and push the component through. And the track, it looks like there's only one track that I need to fix, which is on the other side of this board, and it looks like it goes to the one of these resistors here, or this resistor, but on the other side, or whatever it is. So I need to fix one of those tracks. So what I'll do is I will try and solder this in neatly and tidily, and then once it's soldered in, we'll try and just put the multimeter against it and just make sure that we don't have a short again, and I'll try and fix that track, and then we'll see how we go. So this is how my trace repair is looking. As you can see, it goes from, that's the best way to show you, goes from here where I've connected it. I scraped away using a blade where the old track was, and it goes to there. So it's just a piece of wire that I've just attached. It's actually a bit of fuse wire that I've used before. So I will just cut that off, and then I'll hopefully fix that little problem. Okay, so this is how the bottom side is looking. Now this part up here is not looking too flash, but I've done the best I kind of can. There's no metal on, there's no track on this side, so the solder only really sticks to this side. So I have tried to use as much solder as I can to get it to stick in that part there. So yeah, I'll just give it a bit of a clean, and that should be okay. And let's flip it around to the other side. Right, so that is in there. I've just tested it, and that appears to work. I tested the, used the multimeter and tested that pin to where that trace is going. So that appears to have worked, and those 2 MOSFETs are in there. This thing's a bit flappy, but that's okay because it's going to get held down by the heat sinks that's going to go back on there. So what I'll do is I'll reapply some thermal paste. I'll get rid of this fan out of the way, and we'll try and put it back together enough so that I can at least turn it on. And so the way this turns on is that you don't need to put the DC in, you can just put the AC in, and we should get something to come up on the screen. That would be a very good indication that it's going to work before I put too much of it together, because the last thing I want to do is put it together and then it go pop on something else. So let's have a look and see what we'll see how we go anyway. So guys, I thought we would, rather than reattaching these heat sinks and going through the whole process of doing all that, what I'll do is I'll first plug it in. What I've done is I've screwed the board to the back of the case here and double checked that there's nothing going to be touching, because obviously things are not screwed in and they're a bit loose. So I've double checked that there's nothing touching. I've just plugged in this, and I've left the fuses for the DC output off. It's not going to matter, I'll just have to get some more, which I've got somewhere lying around, but we don't need those to test it. All we should need to do is plug in the AC, and we should get something come up on the screen. If there's something that's not else, well, something else that isn't blowing, it would be a good test to find this out anyway. And obviously if it goes bang, then it goes bang and something else is the problem, or obviously these things could blow again, or otherwise something else could blow, or we just get nothing on the screen, and which obviously indicates there's also a problem with maybe the AC side of things. But yeah, I'm not too sure. So normally what happens is that you plug in the AC and the screen comes on, and then you'll see the DC. The inverter itself doesn't turn on if there's just DC and there's no AC. So if you have no AC connected, then the inverter will stay off until you connect that AC, just like a normal grid tie inverter. So let's plug it in and stand back. Right, so I've plugged it into the power there, but I haven't yet turned it on. So I will just do that now. And what I've got is I've got one of these right here, so it gives me a nice easily on button without needing to be standing right over it. And the screen came on. Okay, so I've just turned it off again and turning it on, because when I walked into the garage the first time there was no output on the screen. It was just everything was blank, and that could have been because my BMS unit turned it off once the voltage dropped on the DC side, because the circuit breaker flicked. But let's just flick this back on again. Starting voltage too low. The screen turns off after 30 seconds or a minute or whatever I've got it set to. So it's registering no input, but that's extremely good that we've got this far. So now what I'll do is I'll turn off that screen. I might just leave on. There you go. I'll just change the screen so it stays on, but what I'll also do is, oh, there's also a blue light there. Look at that. So anyway, let's turn that off. What I'll do now is I'll take it back off the case. I've got to remount these. Oh, I've got to make sure now that I've turned it back on again that I don't touch any capacitors. But I've also, I'll remount these heat sinks, screw everything back in again, put our fuses in the back, and then turn it back on again, and I'll bring the camera back. So guys, as I'm putting this together so we can test it, I have come across a major problem. I have completely lost the screws that went into here and all around the side of the board. I have found a box of computer screws that's the same thread as here, so that's perfect. I've just thrown all these in here. However, in part 2 of the video, I also took the board off, and it also meant that I took apart these brackets, or took off these brackets. And these brackets are exactly the same type as these ones here, where they screw in and hold 2 MOSFETs to the heatsink. And what they've done, the same thing here, is I've got a screw hole and then a bracket that sits in here. If you watch part 2 again, you'll be able to see the brackets on the table in question. But I've completely lost them. I've spent the last 3 afternoons looking everywhere, in every box and every container that I can possibly think of, and I just can't find it. This is, I suppose, the issue of having so many projects all on the go, but it really highlights the need when you take something apart to put everything in one container so that it doesn't get lost. And unfortunately I left it on the kitchen table and it got lost, so I'm a bit stuck. However, what I've done is I thought, well, we're going to have to figure this out, because this is the only thing that's stopping me from putting this inverter or connecting this up to DC and giving it a test. So what I've done is I've got this bracket. I think this is the back of a motherboard. It's a very sturdy bracket. I think this is on the back of the heatsink for the motherboard. So what I've done is I've cut the 2 sides off it, and when you cut the sides off, it looks a bit like this thing. So I've got 2 of these now. That's one, and that's the other one. Now the size of them, how wide they are, doesn't particularly matter, because it can stick out, because I've got tons of clearance on this side here. But all it needs to do is I need to drill 2 holes in this, stick it in here, slide it in, and then put some long screws in. Now the other problem is that these screws, the thread on those, I have no idea what type of thread it is. I've tried every screw that I can think of, and I can't find one that'll thread into that. So that's another big pain in the butt. So what I'm going to have to do now is I'm going to have to drill out those screw holes on both sides, and then possibly what I'll do is I'll use some of these to screw into that. Now I'm quite lucky in the respect that it does just go straight through. That yeah, it does go straight through, and I'm not too sure if you're going to see it on camera, but yeah, those holes go straight through to the other side, which means using some of these isn't going to be too difficult. So I'm going to give that a go. So pretty much drill some holes in this, spaced correctly, stick that in there. This is very quite strong, so this won't bend. Well, it won't bend under the weight that I will put it under. and that should hold those diodes to the back heatsink. And I'll do that on both sides, and then hopefully that will mean that we can then plug this damn thing in and give it a good test. So I'll just try and attempt to do this as a workaround, and it just means that if I do find those brackets, they're going to be useless because I've drilled out the screw hole. Mind you, I should still be able to use them. But either way, yeah, let's try that. Right, so after about an hour of mucking around, we finally have this in place, holding down those MOSFETs. And the same with the other side, so that's very tight in there now. These MOSFETs aren't going anywhere. So, that's really good. And the other side is almost the same, but I made a couple of other changes. But either way, she's ready to go back together. So what I'll do is I've put the fuses in down here, and I've cable tied this side here so that's a bit tidier, and we're pretty much good to plug it in and see how she goes. So let's just put the cover beside it and let's just try it one more time, and then we'll connect it up to the battery. Right, moment of truth. So I've got the AC plugged in, I've got the button on my hand, I've got the screen and everything ready to test, so let's have a look. Well, that's a good sign. That means nothing is shorted, which is great. And obviously on the screen it's just showing 228 volts, which is great. Nothing on the DC side. Fuses are in, but obviously there's no battery connection. So next thing to do is obviously connect it up to some batteries. Right, so one thing I'll point out just before I put this back on the wall is I actually had it sitting off. If any of you remember the initial video, I had it actually sitting off the wall so that it had tons of ventilation in the back there, so it wasn't pretty much directly on the back, or so mounted to the piece of wood. It was sitting out from the piece of wood, as you can see there, so that would have helped the cooling at the bottom. However, those main MOSFETs are all in the center. No idea why it's not connected to the back heatsink, since that's the biggest heatsink. But anyway, I just thought I'd quickly show you that part, how it's actually attached to the wall. So it just sits on like that, and looks pretty good. So next thing to do, let's plug some power into it, and I'll wire up the DC back again. I've actually charged these batteries back up, so all these are fully charged back to 4 volts per cell now. But unfortunately the other issue I might have is that I've got no way of limiting how much power this is actually going to put out, because right now the house is consuming or is using a bit of power, and it's going to be more than 2000 watts because it's 9 o'clock at night, in which case this thing's going to ramp up to full. Not sure if I really want it to just ramp straight up to full if it actually does work, or obviously otherwise it'll just blow that circuit breaker because there's still a fault. So yeah, let's just wire it up and have a look, eh? Right guys, so everything's connected. I've got the DC connected. It is currently turned off on the circuit breaker, so there's no power from the batteries going into this just yet. The batteries are sitting around 81 volts, I think it is, or around 80 volts. So there's tons of battery power. We've got this up on the wall, and we're about to turn on. What I'll do is I'll first turn on the AC, just check that the screen and stuff's coming on. Now obviously the AC is fine, so with this external CT clamp we should see this number change, and it did. So we're seeing 3 and 4 just a second ago. So what I'll do now is I'll turn off the AC. And obviously the problem with this unit is the DC side. So really, this is the moment of truth, whether it goes pop or bang or anything else, or the circuit breaker just pops off again. So I'll try and get this in focus, and that way you can see any smoke that pours out of it. So ready? Okay. So we've got power. This is saying we've got 80 volts. So it hasn't gone bang, so that's an extremely good sign. Okay, so now we'll turn on the AC and we'll see if it starts working. Who's taking bets? Well, something went pop. Just as the fan turned on, it went pop. And I can smell something bad. Once again. So it didn't blow the circuit breaker. It tried to work, but it went pop. I almost thought we were there, guys. I almost thought we were there. So I'm not too sure what would have went pop. Obviously there's something else causing the problem. And that's really annoying. What I'll do is, with the AC or with the DC turned off, I'll just turn on the AC again and just see what happens. So this time it's seeing 4 volts. But there's something definitely went poof, because I can smell it. So I won't turn on the DC again, because something definitely stopped. And that's really annoying. So I guess what I'll do is pull it apart again. My flash just turned off because my battery is going flat on my phone. But what I'll do is I'll try and pull it apart again and try and figure out what went pop this time. I would suggest potentially it's the same component, and if it is, then obviously there's something else going on that's the problem. And well, I do have more of those N-channel MOSFETs because I ordered 5 of them. And but yeah, that's really annoying actually, because we've spent a lot of time getting this back on the wall fixed to this point. And yeah, so thanks again for watching, guys. Sorry about it hasn't been a happy ending, but yeah, oh well.